I'm Alex Rodriguez.
And I'm Jason Kelly.
From Bloomberg, this is The Deal. Each week, you'll hear us in conversation with business icons.
This show will explore deal-making across sports, media, and entertainment.
That is a harsh lesson in business.
Sports is not as simple as bringing a bunch of big names together.
I didn't want to do another stomp you out speech.
It opened up so many more doors.
The show is called The Deal.
Listen to The Deal.
Listen to The Deal on Spotify.
With threats to our nation waiting around every corner, adaptability is more important than ever. When conditions change without notice, quick strategic thinking is crucial. And with obstacles consistently impending, determination is essential in overcoming them. It's this willingness, decisiveness, and resilience that sets Marines apart. With our fighting spirit, we don't just fight battles, we win them. Marines are the constant our nation counts on to fight the unknown. And through adaptable problem solving, we do just that. Learn more at marines.com.
With the Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
This is your captain speaking. We've got clear runway and the weather's fine, but we're just going to circle up here a while and get lucky. No, nothing like that. It's just these cash prizes add up quick. So I suggest you sit back, keep your tray table upright, and start getting lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Hello and welcome to the Paddock and The Pavilion with me, your host, Stephen Wallace. The Cheltenham Festival is here. Joining us on today's show is Chris Pitt, author and racing historian, a regular on this pod who has just written Let No Memories Fade, a book celebrating this year's centenary of the Cheltenham Gold Cup. Enjoy some of the unique and special stories about the famous race, the blue riband of steeplechasing. And we have more Cheltenham podcasts coming soon on the Paddock and the Pavilion. Next up, it's Stan Hayhurst, the oldest living Gold Cup winning jockey. But now it's time for Chris. Welcome back to the Paddock and the Pavilion, Chris, to celebrate the centenary of the Cheltenham Gold Cup and to talk about your new book, Let No Memories Fade.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Looking forward to talking about that, some of the great moments of the last 100 years.
Yes, in this podcast, we're going to talk about your memories. I'm sure you've got plenty, and some stories from the book. I've picked out 12. Some of them are some of the unusual ones, but let's, to start with, start talking about the book. How did the book come about? And did you approach Cheltenham or did they approach you?
Now, Cheltenham approached me, Andre Klein in particular. I had written the history of Warwick Racecourse when Andre was the general manager there. And my first book, A Long Time Gone, just happened to be Andre's favourite that he's taken all the way around the world with him, and he's never more than 6 feet away from his bedside. So it didn't take an awful lot of persuading for me to write the history of Warwick. And it was a natural fit when he came to me and said, would you like to do Cheltenham? For which I was very flattered, and it's the highest profile project that I've been involved with.
How long did it take from beginning to end?
Relatively quickly for me, once I got going, probably about 18 months. The genesis of the book, really, we didn't want it to be any sort of chronological thing, because those have been done before. We wanted 100 things about the Gold Cup. So yes, we've got the great horses, the great jockeys, owners, trainers, but we wanted more than that. So we put in things like the history of TV coverage of the Gold Cup, sponsorship, where the Gold Cup was manufactured, the bookmaker's view, photographer's view, roads and pubs and statues named after winners, as much as we could think of a diverse range.
That's what I like about the book, because it's almost a coffee table, but you can pick it up and put it down.
Yeah, it's why we didn't actually do it in hardback, because we didn't really want to replicate a coffee table book, but it is the sort of book you can dip into and you don't have to read from page to page.
Photos-wise, were there any difficult ones to get hold of?
Yeah, Cheltenham were actually very, very good. A lady named Lucy Jackson was quite incredible in what she managed to dig up. But we also used quite a lot from the doyen of Cheltenham photographers, Bernard Parkin, who went to his first Cheltenham Gold Cup, I think, about 1934. Not that he remembers too much about it, because he was only 4 years old. But we used a lot of his, and that was again a natural fit. And we sourced them from various publications. Andre gave us a year's subscription to the National Newspaper Library, so that was very useful. And Mary was instrumental. My wife Mary was instrumental in going through that and sourcing the articles, and I turned them into stories.
You've got that famous photo of the jockeys in 1974.
Yeah, and I was looking at it the other day, and there'd be no more than 2 or 3 of them that are still living with us. I mean, Stan Hayhurst, the oldest living jockey, I'm glad to say, is still around in his 90s, and Ron Barry, who rode the Dickler, but there wouldn't be too many more. Frank Berry, who won in 72 on Glencoraig Lady, yeah, I mean, he's still there, but I can't think of many others on that photo that were still with us.
You must know the Cheltenham Gold Cup now better than anyone. Well, apart from the guy that was on Mastermind earlier this week.
I think I got an equal score to him, or maybe even beat him. I can't quite remember. But yeah, Andre would have done the same, I think. We both had it fairly ingrained into us in the last 18 months.
What about the Cup itself? What's the story of the famous Cheltenham Gold Cup?
Actually, it was manufactured in Birmingham by a company called S. Blankensee and Sons in Birmingham. It's 18 karat gold, weighs 644 grams, and it's the original Gold Cup that was won by Red Splash in 1924, and his owner, it passed on to his children, what have you, and they sold it in 1979, and it languished in a bank vault for about 40 years. Cheltenham bought it in 2018, and that now is the trophy, and no one is allowed to touch it except someone who has owned, trained, or ridden the winner of the Gold Cup. Even Andre himself has to wear white gloves when he holds onto it.
Yes, Andre, who's been on tour with the Cheltenham Gold Cup, was our guest in episode 248, and he's been everywhere with the Cheltenham Gold Cup.
Yeah, and not just racing environments. He's taken it to hospitals, to care homes, to schools. He's been to all sorts of places, and internationally he's taken it over to France for the French Connection, taken it to Ireland for the Dublin Racing Festival. He's climbed the highest peaks in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, as I'm sure he told you, been up Arkle, and that Gold Cup has been pretty much everywhere in the last 12 months.
Why then did the Cheltenham Gold Cup, over 3 miles, 2 furlongs, you'll correct me if it wasn't in the first running, begin in 1924? Because the festival had started before the First World War.
Yeah, it has. And of course, the National Hunt Chase was the preeminent race, which is still run at the festival. I think they were looking initially for something that would be a good trial for the Grand National, because it was ideal time, 2 or 3 weeks before. And whether they thought, I mean, Frederick Cathcart was the man, he was the clerk of the course there. He was the man who came up with the idea. Whether they actually thought about how it would develop, I don't know. But it was certainly in its early years seen as nothing more than a Grand National trial. Wasn't even the most valuable race at the meeting. Obviously, the National Hunt Chase was, but the County Hurdle was worth more than the Gold Cup early on.
Well, let's focus on the 12 stories that I've picked out from the book. And we've got to start, you've already mentioned the horse's name, with the first winner, 1924 Red Splash. A 5-year-old. What can you tell us about his story?
Well, in actual fact, he's the youngest horse ever to win it, because although officially 5 years old, he was actually still only 4, because he was a May foal, so still 2 months short of his 5th birthday when he won it. The trainer, Fred Withington, was really in 2 minds about running the horse at all. There was a hot favourite called Alcazar to be ridden by Dick Rees, who was the jockey of the time, who Withington had tried and failed to get. And it was only on the morning of the race, when he got to Cheltenham and found that Alcazar had suffered some sort of injury and been pulled out on the morning of the race, that he then quickly made his mind up to get hold of Dick Rees, and if he could ride it, he would run. And sure enough, Rees was available, and that was it. It was a three-way finish between Red Splash, Conjurer II, and Gerald L. And the interesting thing is that Red Splash was only 5, as we say, but never won again. He was hard to train. He only ran 6 times in the next 5 years, and that was it. So Red Splash is the winner of the first Cheltenham Gold Cup, but probably not one of the great winners.
I'm not going to go through the obviously the not 100 winners, because we haven't had 100 races, but I am going to then ask you a question about, funnily enough, through your prompting, about the winners in 1925 and 1926, because they both featured in a dead heat on the 1st of May 1923.
At Sligo, of all places, in a 2-runner 3-mile chase, where they dead heated, and quite often in those days they would rerun the race to see who was the better horse, but they agreed to split the prize. And there we are. We've got Ballinode, known as the Sligo Mare, who goes on to win the Cheltenham Gold Cup 2 years later, and Coco, ridden by Tim Hamey, won the following year. Coco was unofficially Irish trained. Is in the list of winners is down as being trained by Alf Bickley at Tarporley in Cheshire, but that was really just a satellite yard for Frank Barber, who trained his own horses in Ireland, including Coco, and had sent him over to England. And Coco himself, I mentioned how Red Splash had never won anything after that. Coco won his share of races, but ended up some years later running his final race in, if you can believe this for a Gold Cup winner, the 2nd Cavalry Brigade heavyweight chase at the Royal Artillery Harriers Bona Fide meeting.
A bit different, I think, yeah.
Just a bit, yeah.
Well, our next story, this person was a bit different. The owner of Golden Miller. This is Dorothy Paget. I think she's the record-winning owner in the Cheltenham Gold Cup.
Yes, of course, she'll be forever known as the owner of Golden Miller. But that wasn't all. She also won the Gold Cup with Roman Hackle in the 1940s and with Mont Tremblant in 1952. But they weren't the only top-class horses. In 2 of the years that Golden Miller won the Gold Cup, she also won the Champion Hurdle with a horse called Insurance, who was the top hurdler of the 1930s. But she won other big races. She won a War Substitutes Derby with Straight Deal in 1943. She won an Irish Grand National with Golden Jap the same year. Even won the Norfolk Derby, the pony racing derby, with a horse called Scottish Rifle. And she was involved in various things. She went into show jumping as well after that and got a horse with a wonderful name called E for Egypt, who ended up being the 1951 Horse of the Year show champion. So it wasn't just Golden Miller, but of course that will be the horse for which she is best known. And Golden Miller's, I think, most famous victory was his 4th one in 1935, when he beat Thomond II in a great duel. And she actually very nearly missed it. She was in Frankfurt that morning, caught a flight to Croydon and then a smaller plane to Cheltenham, and got there about 15 minutes before the race.
And she had some unusual habits as well.
Yeah, I mean, she lived her life in reverse. She slept during the day and woke up and took her breakfast around 10 o'clock at night and was nocturnal. And that was it. She had a short fuse. She was very, very superstitious. She would ring her trainers at ungodly hours until, I think it was Owen Anthony actually put his foot down and said, "You will not ring me after this time." But yeah, I mean, she loved horses more than people. certainly Golden Miller, I think she loved more than she ever loved a man.
And she had some unusual arrangements with the bookmakers.
Yes, I think she bet with William Hill, and because she was asleep during the day, she would actually place her bets at the end of the day, not knowing the result of the race, and was so trusted by William Hill that he would actually take those bets hours after the race had been run.
Let's move on then to the 1940s. I wanted to first mention the war years. What can you tell us about the Cheltenham Gold Cup during the Second World War?
Well, they only missed two, 1943 and 1944. But by 1942, it was they were lucky to go ahead with it. The police actually questioned various motorists about the improper use of supplementary petrol, because, of course, petrol was rationed at the time. 1942 was actually quite an interesting year because it was a very foggy day, and Raymond Glendenning, who was commentating on the radio, was forbidden to mention the weather to avoid disclosing anything to the enemies. So it was all very cloak and dagger. And then when the race got going again in 1945, it was won by Red Rower, who'd been third and second in the previous two run-ins, 41, 42, and at last got his just desserts.
One question for you. I noticed the Grand National wasn't run during the war. It ran in 1940, but didn't resume until 46. Why was the Cheltenham Gold Cup run and the Grand National not?
I think Liverpool was being a much larger urbanised area, and thereby probably a far more likely target for enemy aircraft than rural Cheltenham. May have had something to do with it. There were very few racecourses that were allowed to race during the war: Cheltenham, Weatherby, and one or two others. And while, of course, flat racing continued because of the link with the breeding industry, as most of the horses running then under national hunt rules were geldings, you didn't have the same sort of urgency to continue it.
In the 1940s, I think we probably had the worst runner in the Cheltenham Gold Cup.
Elsick ran in the Gold Cup 3 years running, 45, 46, 47. Was born in obscurity out of a mare that I don't think had even run, by a pretty much unknown stallion. He was born in obscurity, which is where he belonged. But the trainer, the owner trainer, Charles Edwards, he had far greater aspirations for the horse. Edwards was an interesting character because he'd actually spent time in Canada as a sort of rustler stroke cowboy. And so he ran Elsick first as soon as he could when racing resumed after the war, ran him at Cheltenham in a handicap. And as you probably know, in those days, well, even now, if a horse hasn't run 3 times to get a handicap mark, he's automatically given top weight. So he ran in his handicap and fell, but the owner evidently thought it had done no harm at all, brought him out 90 minutes later in another race, and he fell again. Even though he had never got round the course, he actually put him in the Cheltenham Gold Cup, ridden by a fellow named Frank Wren, I believe, and the horse ran out at the second fence. Then a fellow turned up named Billy Bell, fresh out the army, would ride anything, and he met the trainer, Charlie Kelly, and said, Billy said, I've got a ride for you later today. My son Glenn's supposed to ride it, but I don't want him to get hurt. And he said, I smelt a rat when he said that. So anyway, he rode Elsick, and for the first time ever got the horse round. He ended up riding him in the Cheltenham Gold Cup 1946, where he got as far as the water before falling. And then the following year, ran out at the second, or was it pulled up at the third fence, I think, with the jockey believing that self-preservation was the best issue at the time. He was an awful horse, in as much as he ran 50 times. He managed a remote third once, having broken 3 of the fences around Worcester and thereby qualified for the Grand National. And that was the only time he was ever placed in 50 starts. And eventually, the Jockey Club refused to accept any more entries. He'd fallen in 22 of his races. He'd run out or refused or pulled up in another 9. And when he got round, it was usually after falling at least once. So Elsick was retired, and I think the people in the weighing room there slept rather easily after that.
Not a horse you'd want to ride, is it?
No, they put him in the Grand National as well, and they organised a petition to stop him running in the Grand National, offering him 250 to 1 about him getting round the course. And to quote his jockey Billy Balfe, he jumped 6 feet in the air over the Melling Road and forgot to take off at the first fence.
I'm Alex Rodriguez.
And I'm Jason Kelly.
From Bloomberg, this is The Deal. Each week, you'll hear us in conversation with business icons.
This show will explore deal-making across sports, media, and entertainment.
That is a harsh lesson in business.
Sports is not as simple as bringing a bunch of big names together.
I didn't want to do another stomp you out speech.
It opened up so many more doors.
The show is called The Deal.
Listen to The Deal.
Listen to The Deal on Spotify.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Everybody in your crew identifies as either Big Mac Burger, McNuggets, or McCrispy Sandwich. But you're the Filet-O-Fish Sandwich all day. That crispy fish, that savory tartar sauce, that melty cheese, that pillowy bun. Yeah, you get it. Every time.
And if you love the Filet-O-Fish, right now you can catch 2 of the classics you love for just $6. Limited time only. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer. Single item at regular price.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Well, let's move on to the 1950s. And we had 10 different winners in the 1950s after 1940s, where Cottage Rake had won 2 Cheltenham Gold Cups. And I'm talking about the 1951 race, which was won by Silver Fame, a bit of a controversial finish.
It was, yeah. A lot of people on the racecourse swore blind that Greenock, ridden by Glenn Kelly, had actually won. It was given to Silver Fame by a short head. And I interviewed Glenn Kelly for another book of mine, and this would be, 40 years after the race. And he said, quote, "I'm bloody sure I won." He was absolutely certain that he had, because he looked to the right and Silver Fame was on his right, and he was absolutely convinced that he'd won. In fact, he said he thinks that the judge made 3 wrong decisions at that particular Cheltenham meeting and wasn't used again. So he tells me. But it was one man's. What do they say about something being one man's problem being another man's advantage? And Martin Maloney, who actually rode Silver Fame, was quite lucky because the Gold Cup was postponed to April that year because the last day of the March festival was abandoned through frost or whatever. And had it been run on the stipulated day in March, Martin Maloney would not have been there because he was laid low with measles.
We also had the mare win the Gold Cup in 1958, Kirsten.
Yes, ridden by great Stan Hayhurst, who I'm very pleased to say in his 90s is still with us. In those days, of course, unlike now, mares did not get the £5 allowance. So Kirsten carried exactly the same weight as the geldings in the race, and the same right up to Glencarrig Lady in 72. So, yes, it was quite an achievement not getting a mare's allowance.
Moving on to the 1960s, would it be fair to say then that the Cheltenham Gold Cup, was it more important then than the Grand National? Or
Yeah, I think that the Cheltenham Gold Cup really, its status, even though Golden Mirror had won 5 times in the 1930s and elevated its status, it didn't really prove to be much more than a trial for the Grand National until after the war. But yeah, I think by the 1960s there was TV coverage. Actually, the first televised Cheltenham was in 1954, so that's 70 years ago. But yeah, during the 60s, I think people realised just what a great spectacle jumping was and what the Cheltenham Festival was as well. The Grand National was, of course, first televised in 1960. And I think that, again, people realised, wow, this is spectacular.
You couldn't have any stories of the 1960s for the Cheltenham Gold Cup without mentioning Arkle and his rival Mill House.
Yes, of course. And Millhouse had won the Cheltenham Gold Cup in 63 and had beaten Arkle in the 63 Hennessy Gold Cup. Millhouse was favoured to win. He started at 15-8 on and Arkle 7-4 against. It was a tremendous race, although there were 4 runners. It was really only concerned those 2 from the outset. They jumped the second last together and Arkle then just sprinted away, winning by about 5 lengths and breaking the course record by 4 seconds between them. Arkle, obviously, just a tremendous horse. I don't need to tell you that much about him because he's the legend of Arkle. I think every racing fan knows.
They met again in 1965.
They did, yeah. And by then, Arkle was clearly superior. Millhouse took him on. Again, only 4 runners, but really only those 2 mattered. And Arkle beat him comfortably by 20 lengths. Had Millhouse been foaled in any other era than Arkle, he may himself have gone on to win 2, 3, 4 Cheltenham Gold Cups. But Arkle, in a way, broke his heart, and towards the end, he was never in the same league.
And Millhouse still ran in the Gold Cup in 1968.
Yeah, and 67, and was leading in each when falling or unseated. His great moment, of course, came when he won the Whitbread Gold Cup in 67, carrying top weight there with a performance that brought the house down, and seldom as a bigger cheer erupted when he returned to the winners' enclosure at Sandown.
Right, we're moving on to the 70s, and my favourite, actually, the Dickler. He set a record for the Cheltenham Gold Cup.
He ran in 7 consecutive Gold Cups between 1970 and 1976. He'd finished 3rd in 71, 72. Won it, of course, in 73 in that famous battle with Pendle when he looked beat for all the world and Pendle just hesitated, which Richard Pittman reckons was perhaps down to the roar of the crowd. The Dickler got back in front. Pendle managed to close the gap again, but the chance was gone and the Dickler got home in a photo. He was second to Captain Christie in 1974 when Captain Christie made a horrific blunder at the last fence. So the Dickler once again almost managed to grab victory out of defeat, but not quite. He ran twice more in 75 and 76, but they were essentially they were warm-ups for the Grand National because he ran in both those years and got round, and it was really only the heavyweight that prevented him from getting closer.
2 others I wanted to pick out from the 1970s. Almost a forgotten horse, L'Escargot, who won the Gold Cup in 70 and 71 and then later went on to win the Grand National.
Yeah, I mean, he shouldn't be forgotten. There's a wonderful book that's out called No Snail at the moment that's by David Owen. And yeah, I mean, he won back-to-back Gold Cups and then went on to win the Grand National. And yes, very much the forgotten horse. Not quite sure why, to be honest with you, but, he was around for a long, long time. He was a top hurdler before he went chasing. And yeah, he should never be forgotten. It's really part of the Cheltenham Gold Cup history.
You can find out lots more about L'Escargot, the Cheltenham Gold Cup winner in 1970 and 1971, in my podcast episode 189 with David Owen. Coming later in this pod, you will find out Chris's favourite memories of the Cheltenham Gold Cup and why the race has never been run on a Saturday, since that famous clash between Arkle and Millhouse in 1964. But now back to Chris. One of the other stats in your book that I loved was the 1977 Gold Cup, where you stated that not one of the horses had ran in the Gold Cup before for that year.
No, that's right. I think that was Davy Ladd's year, wasn't it? Yeah, you get these odd sort of quirks, I suppose. But yeah, I don't remember too much about that race, to be perfectly honest with you, except that, Davy Ladd was probably the best of a relatively moderate field that year.
Now we're on to the 1980s, and it was quite a while before we knew the winner of the 1980 Cheltenham Gold Cup.
Yeah, this is one of the great stories, isn't it? Tide Cottage, who had fallen the year before when level with Alverton, maybe just in front of Alverton at the last fence, finally appeared to have got his reward when coming home clear of Master Smudge. And then it was discovered that Tide Cottage had actually, that they found minute traces of theobromine, which could really never have affected the performance at all. But because of the rules and regulations in place, he was unfortunately disqualified, which left it to Master Smudge, who was owned and trained by a fellow named Arthur Barrow, who doubled training racehorses with being a farmer stroke livestock transporter. And Master Smudge was, again, I mentioned about Elsik being bred in obscurity. So was Master Smudge, out of a horse that had run 26 times out of hurdles and not been placed, out of a moderate stallion. The breeder was so disappointed with the offspring that he actually sold the horse to a band of travellers in exchange for a crate of whiskey. A local pig farmer then named John Tarr bought him. And it was when Arthur Barrow went to collect some of John Tarr's pigs to take them to market that he saw Master Smudge in a field. The horse galloped towards him, and when he'd loaded the pigs and was about to pull away, the horse ran alongside the van as if to say, "Buy me, take me home." So he got out and he bought Master Smudge as an unbroken 2-year-old for 312 quid, which I think you would agree was a rather good investment.
Yeah, a very good investment, Chris. I was hoping you were going to remember the name of that stallion.
Yeah, he was called Master Stephen, of course. I don't know if he ever got another horse that was as good as that. I'm sure he didn't, but Master Stephen will go down as the sire of a Gold Cup winner.
Well, I was that many, many years ago at school. One story we have to mention in the 1980s is the 1983 Gold Cup with Michael Dickinson training the first 5 home.
Yeah, will that ever be done again? Yes, it got amazing, wasn't it? With Bragourn and Captain John and Wayward Lad and Silverbuck and Ashley House. Tremendous achievements. Michael Dickinson, I know, lost stones in weight worrying about the whole thing. Will it ever be done again? It's been close. Paul Nicholls has saddled the first 3 one year, and he had something like 4 out the first 5 one year. Willie Mullins with being mob-handed, Gordon Elliott, what have you. It can happen again, can't it? But it's going to take a monumental achievement.
Let's move to the 1990s and a well-deserved winner in 1994.
Yes, the Fellow, the only horse trained in France to win the Gold Cup, and also the only horse to be beaten the short head in 2 consecutive Gold Cups, as he was in 91 and 92. The jockey Adam Condrat, of course, came in for quite a lot of criticism from the press, saying that he wasn't strong enough in the finish. So when he finally won the Gold Cup in 94, that was quite a bit of retribution. And I was pleased to see it because the Fellow deserved it, didn't he? I mean, having beaten in photo finishes twice, you really like to see him finally win the big one, and he did.
The owner of the Fellow wasn't there on Gold Cup Day.
No, she was in a bridge tournament in Germany, I believe, the Marquesa de Maratala, and I think this was either the last year of the BBC's coverage or the first year of Channel 4's coverage of Cheltenham. And the irony was that the Marquesa was a huge friend of Peter O'Sullivan, who, of course, was the voice of the Gold Cup for so many years.
We're now going to move to the 21st century. We've got dual winners. Well, we've got a dual winner in Album Photo. We had a hat-trick by Best Mate. But I wanted to talk to you about the rivalry between Denman and Courto Star.
Yes, to me, it was reminiscent of Arkle and Millhouse until Arkle proved his supremacy. There they were in neighbouring boxes, both trained by Paul Nicholls. And Courto Star won it in 2007. Denman in 2008 went on with a circuit to go, galloped them into the ground, essentially. This was an era, it was a fantastic era, wasn't it? Paul Nicholls had not just those two, he had the likes of Big Bucks and Masterminded. We just think back now, and that's what, 15 years ago now that these happened, and we haven't had anything quite that momentous as regards to rivalry between an irresistible force and an immovable object. And we should be very, very grateful that we went through that era of Courto Star and Denman. And of course, Courto wins the Gold Cup again in 2009, the first one ever to regain the crown.
We did have a fantastic race, though, in 2018 with Native River and Might Bite.
We did. In the forward for Let No Memories Fade, Ruby Walsh actually says that was an absolutely brilliant horse race. Dickie Johnson, who also wrote a forward for the book, said, he answered my every question. It was a duel for three parts of the race, really, between Native River and Might Bites. And yeah, again, fantastic. Native River, a natural front runner, was taken on, and they slugged it out. And Might Bite pressurised him the whole way until the run-in where Native River pulled clear. But yeah, that was a great Gold Cup. Ruby Walsh said that was one of the best Gold Cups he ever saw.
Well, thanks, Chris. They're just some of the many stories in your book. We don't want to talk about too many more because we want people to buy the book. But have you got a favourite story of all the stories you've written in Let No Memories Fade?
I think it's the one that surprised me most that we've covered, really. The fact that you had a 2-runner 3-mile chase at Sligo that ended in a dead heat, and both of the horses went on to win the Gold Cup in consecutive years. That is just so unlikely. I'm not sure Sligo have ever actually thought of that. It was 100 years ago last year, and perhaps a year or two later, Sligo might retrospectively do something to call it the spring chase or what have you, and commemorate those two horses.
So what's your first memory, Chris, of the Cheltenham Gold Cup?
Just about remember Millhouse winning it in 63, but 64, I suppose, luckily for me, the great clash between Arkle and Millhouse in 64, because that year was on a Saturday. It was just Cheltenham that year had decided in 64 to hold the 3-day festival on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday for the first time ever. It obviously guaranteed far bigger audiences for the Gold Cup on the Saturday. But it only happened the once, and one of the reasons was that it was unpopular with the local point-to-points and other race meetings. And the National Hunt Committee held their annual meeting in May and voted, and it was quite a close vote, from 11 to 9 in favour of returning the festival to Tuesday to Thursday. But because I think Arkle and Millhouse, the race was on a Saturday, so many more people were able to watch it, and it was certainly my first great memory.
And when was your first visit to the Cheltenham Gold Cup?
1969. What a myth. I was still at school. It was my last year at school. And an old school friend of mine, Matt Shepherd, his dad was a bookmaker and decided to have a busman's holiday at Cheltenham. And he took me and my mate Max along in his car. And that was the first time that I seen Cheltenham for all it was. It wasn't a nice day. It was raining. The ground was heavy, and 12-year-old Weatherbys slogged his way up the hill. And I can still see it now with Domacorn chasing him vainly. I took it all in. It wasn't one of those things that you think, oh God, I wish I'd sort of considered it more and appreciated it at the time. I did appreciate it for all it was worth. And it was just tremendous to be there, and wow, absolutely wonderful. I didn't go the following year, but I was there the next 2 years when Lescargo won his second Gold Cup and Glencoraig Lady won. The Mayor won in 72.
So had you taken a day off school that first time you went?
I tell people when I do talks to local societies that I probably had more spurious dental appointments than anyone else. And again, it's something that I say quite a lot, that I was usually rarely seen in school on the Thursday and Friday of the Grand National. And this one Monday after the Grand National, the teacher turning round to me and saying, "This obsession you've got with horse racing will do you no good at all, So far, it's taken me all the way around the world. I've written 6-7 books and formed a racing club. Most of all, met my wife, Mary, who, like me, is a freelance journalist. Love to meet the bloke and say it didn't do me too much harm,
And have you got a favourite memory of all those Cheltenham Gold Cups?
It's what you grow up with. I mean, Arkle Millhouse was absolutely brilliant. Dawn Run was superb. I just got a postgrad student tenant who'd moved in, and her mother chose to come that day to bring some clothes and belongings and what have you. And as she knocked at the door, it was about the time that Dawn Run was jumping the last fence. And when my student tenant opened it, it was to the sound of this incredible shrieking of, "Come on, no!" And I think she must have wondered what sort of an idiot that her daughter was going to share the house with. So for that reason, Dawn Run. Obviously, Desert Orchid, will he run, won't he run, and the way that he performed. And funny enough, only yesterday I was on the phone with David Ellsworth for a good long time reminiscing. So, yeah, things like that, yeah.
Well, the final question I'm going to ask you about the actual Cheltenham Gold Cup, who would be your top 3 winners?
Oh, again, that is so difficult because you obviously say Arkle and Courtauld Star. I mean, I wasn't around for Golden Miller, Cottage Rake, Easter Hero, Prince Regent. So it is so difficult to compare those eras. I think what you grow up with approximates to the absolute. You grow up with Arkle and you can't believe that any other horse could emulate or exceed anything that he accomplished. So, I'd have to say Arkle, I'd have to say Courtauld. It'd be very, very predictable, Desert Orchid. But I say for pure memory, what a myth for actually being there when he won. Let no memories fade. Where can we get the book from? It's available online, Cheltenham Racecourse. Easy enough to get. Just go online, Cheltenham Racecourse, and they'll have the sort of shop section, and you can get it on that. Have you been doing plenty of book signings? Yeah, I was there all 3 days of the November meeting, both days of December, and also the trials day, and signed well over 100 copies each day. I'm told that sales are well over in excess of 1,000 now, and I'll be there all 4 days of the festival to be signing there, and I think they're going to arrange for various jockeys to join me. Already I've had A.P. McCoy, Ruby Walsh, Barry Geraghty, Graham Thorner, and Graham McCourt, and Andrew Thornton all come along and sign the book. So there'll be some big names popping in from time to time. Thank you very much, Chris, for joining me on this podcast to talk about your memories of the Cheltenham Gold Cup and to talk about your book, Let No Memories Fade. Recommend it to any racing fan. There's some great stories in there, and we've just touched on some of those stories. Thank you again for being on the Paddock and the Pavilion. Thank you very much, Stephen.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
Okay, round 2. Name something that's not boring. laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Ah, oh, sorry, we were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right, ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.